Good evening and welcome to our forum on school counselors. I'm Georgette Knoll from the League of Women Voters ABC. The League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan political organization, encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League never supports or opposes candidates for public office. We welcome members, both men and women, with diverse political views. The League of Women Voters in Anoka, Blaine, Coon Rapids area has been active for more than 75 years, and its members are from the communities of northern Anoka County as well as the Champlin-Dayton area of Hennepin County. Most know us as the group who helps register voters, but League is much more than that. We study a variety of issues, from form positions through consensus, and use the positions to advocate for change. However, before we advocate for an issue, we first try to thoroughly understand it, and that's why we're here this evening. Academic counselors are a part of the support services that Minnesota students have access to. Professional school counselors are certified and licensed educators who are uniquely qualified to help students maximize their academic success, career readiness, and personal and social development. School counselors have the education and experience to help students plan for college and ensure they are ready to enter the workforce. Counselors are also a valuable resource to parents in this process. The issue that we're going to explore this evening is the large caseloads of school counselors in Minnesota and the impact that it has on students and the possibility of a legislative solution. League of Women Voters has a position on education at the national and state level that supports equal access to a good public education. Our League of Women Voters Minnesota policy states that state funding for education should be at a level that makes programs of comparable substance and quality available to all. And it's with that position in mind that we begin our conversation. Panel participants will be Jim Bierma, President of the Minnesota School Counselors Association, Nita Kumar, Director of Mental Health for Anoka Hennepin School District 11, Sue Abderholden, the Executive Director of NAML, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and we have two of our legislators with us, State Senator Alice Johnson and State Representative Jerry Newton, who also happens to be a member of the League of Women Voters ABC. They will share their perspectives on the role of counselors and the impact of the large caseloads, the growing number of adolescents who are experiencing severe and often persistent mental health challenges, the expanding need for professionals in schools to support safe and effective learning, and they will also discuss legislative concerns and initiatives relating to the need for decreasing the high student-to-counselor ratio in Minnesota. We will begin our discussion with Jim Bierma, who will introduce the issue and talk about the role of counselors in a school. And then we'll have a few questions for the other panel participants. And after we've done the first questions, we're going to take a short break, and questions from the audience will be asked of the participants. And there will be cards going around, so if you have a question, be sure to fill out a card and pass it to the center. So let's start. Jim, explain the school counselor issue. What school counselors do now. If caseloads were reduced, what would they do differently? And besides the numbers, what are the indicators that we need more counselors? And is this a new issue?
Well, those are a lot of questions, but I'll do my best to try to answer them. But first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for having this forum today and inviting school counselors here. And I would especially like to thank Senator Johnson and Representative Newton for being here and their support for school counselors. So first of all, the first part is what is the issue with school counselors here in Minnesota? That Minnesota has the third worst student to school counselor ratio in the nation, and that's 791 students per every school counselor. That's our state average. And so the national average is around 450 to 1, and the recommended school counselor average is 250 to 1. So how that affects, that greatly it negatively affects students and families all around Minnesota. So the American School Counselor Association promotes a comprehensive school counseling program in the, as you said about, in the academic, career, and personal social domain. But now that college and career readiness has become one of the major issues in education today, school counselors play a vital role in this because we are uniquely trained in career counseling, helping students find the best post-secondary options, to help them with academic planning, so that they can reach their post-secondary aspirations. We also help them with financial planning, which is becoming more and more important all the time. And the one that I think is most important is personal social counseling. So I'd like to address each one of those issues very quickly. So the first one is career counseling. And so school counselors have learned how to help students make informed decisions about possible careers that fit their interests, their skills, and that it will be a viable career that would be something that can help them in the future. So I also teach at the University of Minnesota, and I have had many students who've never taken any kind of career survey or career inventory to help them learn what kind of careers they're interested in and what kind of careers might be a good path. So one of the ways that it's affected Minnesota students is that we have many students who enroll in a post-secondary institution and they have no idea what they want to do. And there's always going to be some students who will fall in that category, but when we do more surveys and more inventories, it's going to help students understand what are some possible career paths for them. The second part of that is finding the best post-secondary option. So school counselors help students. So let's just say, what are the best post-secondary institutions for that? So when we talk about post-secondary, we are talking about 4-year colleges and universities, 2-year colleges, and also certificate programs. And I'd like to just talk about how school counselors really emphasize that many certificate and 2-year programs lead to high-skilled careers. For example, being a carpenter, or if you want to be a welder, or many nursing programs lead directly to a high-skilled career that pays a very good wage. But also another advantage of 2-year colleges is that if you do want to go to a 4-year school, that it can often cut your post-secondary debt in half. For example, in Minneapolis and St. Paul public schools, there's something called the Power of You program that's also in Brooklyn Center and many other suburbs where students can get their whole tuition paid for their first 2 years of college at MCTC and at St. Paul College. And so school counselors help students understand that there are very good programs. I worked and I helped develop a program called Ramp Up to Readiness, which is works all around the state. And I had one situation at a school where they didn't have a school counselor, and I was talking to a parent where they were not notified. They wanted to go to Iowa State and be in an engineering program, and so that was their goal. And so they went to a 2-year college, which of course we always think is a very good option. But what happened was that after they graduated from the 2-year college, they still had to go 3 years to Iowa State to get their program, and they didn't know that. If there would have been a school counselor there, they would have been able to tell them about that. So, but school counselors also know, and I can tell you right now, and you can, when you have questions, you can ask me this, but we can tell you what are the best music post-secondary institutions, what are the best for engineering, for being a carpenter, for being a teacher, and we know that what post-secondary institutions are good in that area. And because of the lack of school counselors, Minnesota students and their families are not able to do that. The third part would be academic planning. Is academic planning with school counselors, they help students say, I want to be a carpenter, I want to be a doctor. What they want to do, school counselors can help them to take classes in middle school and high school on how how they can reach their post-secondary aspirations. And the other thing is I've had many students who say, I want to be a veterinarian. And so I said, that's great. But they say, but I hate science. I say, well, that's a problem. and so, but, you know, to get them to dip their toes into advanced science courses and to see if that's something that they can do. And school counselors know how to set up academic plans so they can do that. The last part, the fourth one that I want to talk about is financial planning. Is school counselors can help students to decide how they can how they can go to college and not have an exorbitant amount of post-secondary debt. And so I would say this quiz out here, but the average Minnesota student, if they graduate from a four-year college, has $29,000 of debt when after they graduate. But we have some students who end up with no debt, and we have other students who end up with over $200,000 worth of debt. And so as a school counselor, I'm not going to tell somebody who wants to be a philosophy major and go to a college and end up with $200,000 of debt. Sometimes that works out for people, and they need to have their eyes wide open for that. And they can go on and become a philosophy professor, or there's a lot of different parts of that. But students need to understand how to do that, and a school counselor can help them with the different types of financial planning. And the last thing that I would like to talk about is personal social readiness. Is that there's many reasons why personal social issues are the biggest reasons why students do not graduate from college. Right now, for the average students in Minnesota who enroll in a four-year institution, how many of them graduate within 6 years is only around 60%. So 40% of those students do not graduate from college. In a two-year college, only 30% of the graduates graduate within 3 years of a two-year college. A school counselor can help. The biggest reason students drop out is because they haven't developed those habits of success. How to use a planner, how to use a binder, how do you take notes in class so that you can be ready in college. And I can say this at the University of Minnesota, is many times their first assignment is a midterm paper, a midterm exam. And so these students, many of our students get in the habit of September as party time. And so then they have problems doing that. With a school counselor, they can help prepare them for that and help them understand the problems with chemical health, and working with other professionals on how we can help that. There are many other personal, social, and mental health issues that play into that, where school counselors can help with those personal, social issues. So I talked about how school counselors can help in the career, post-secondary, academic, financial, and personal social domain. And so your question about how would it be different if we had more school counselors is that we would have more students who would be able to make informed decisions about possible career paths, who had some ideas of what would be a good career for them to possibly go in by the time they graduate from high school. The second part is they would be students who would understand what are my best post-secondary options for my careers of interest. Or if they don't know their careers of interest, they haven't done one, what would be my best post-secondary options? And school counselors could help them with them. They'd help them with academic planning. And there was one part that I left out that is very important within academic planning, and that talks about college credit. School counselors make sure that they take, you can do PSEO, which is where they can get college credit, AP, IB, and school counselors work very hard with students so that they take these early college credits, and there would be more with them, academic planning, the financial issues, and then I just also think that the biggest one is the personal social domain, helping students with their mental health, with their personal social issues, helping them develop those habits of success, and to partner with parents is to working with them in all those areas and to help the parents understand how they can help. And I think those are some of the bigger issues of how Minnesota could be helped with more school counselors.
In Minnesota, do counselors only work with students at the secondary level?
No, there are elementary, middle school, and high school counselors. But unfortunately, in Minnesota, we have the lowest number of elementary counselors anywhere in the nation. And so that is crucial to have elementary counselors, because we've learned about early childhood education and developing those habits and being able to help students in those areas. And so so it is elementary, middle school, and high school counselors. But our biggest area of need is elementary counselors, but we also are very, very low in high school and middle school counselors.
Thank you. Nita, as the Director of Mental Health for Anoka Hennepin District, I'm sure you are seeing a significant increase in serious mental health issues with adolescents. Although licensed, school counselors are generalists, not specialists, and are not licensed or trained as mental health professionals. At what point does a school counselor need the assistance from a mental health professional?
Our counselors in our school district do a lot of work with prevention, early intervention, and then also with our school-based mental health therapists. So we don't necessarily encourage a handoff where the student is working with the counselor and then starts to work with the therapist only because we've discovered that there's a lot of symptoms with mental health. We want them to continue to work with the student and partner with the therapist. There's still a role for the counselor to continue working with the child even after a therapist has begun working with the kid.
Comparing school counselors and mental health providers such as school psychologists, how do the two roles overlap and how are they dissimilar?
So in our school district, we have counselors, social workers, psychologists, and our school-based mental health therapist. The counselor role, I think, and I think Jim did a great job of explaining the scope of their role, and so we noticed that they're working a lot with the personal social kind of aspect of the work as it relates to their academics. We also see that the social workers in the school district do a lot more work with things like homelessness, helping families with resources, so that's how they're differentiated. And then our psychologists are primarily working with special ed students who have an IEP, so they're generally not available for the entire school population.
Thank you. Sue, school psychologists and other mental health providers, their duties are mainly clinical and they mostly serve students with special needs or within the special needs system, while school counselors serve the entire student body. Is either service able to adequately meet the needs of students with mental health issues?
Well, I think there's an important distinction here, and that is that typically school social workers, counselors, and psychologists are actually not clinicians. And that's where bringing in a school-based therapist who is a mental health professional, a clinician, or in Minnesota we also have school-linked mental health grants where community mental health provider, their therapists co-locate in the school and provide that therapy. But what we found in our model, which is actually recognized nationally, is that everyone needs to work together. So even if you're bringing the clinician in from a provider, because then they bill insurance and things like that, they will actually see that many kids are referred to them from school personnel, school support personnel, and from teachers and actually from families as well. But then they collaborate and work together to make sure that that child is successful in school. But I think it's really important to kind of differentiate that because there is a lot of prevention work and early intervention work that goes on that we wouldn't define as clinical work.
All right. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
I could just real briefly say, as I definitely agree with both of what you said. And for an example would be a student who had an eating disorder. And so as a school counselor, I've referred many students who had an eating disorder, and I do not have, it takes a special type of therapist, special training to help with an eating disorder. And so I think that I'll just say another really big one is we do classroom lessons, and a lot of times in classroom lessons we'll talk about abuse prevention, such as sexual abuse, physical abuse, and many times I get students who come in who have significant mental health issues, and I will refer them to the more qualified professionals in that, but that doesn't mean that I quit seeing them. I work with them. I make sure I'm still the school contact with them, because it's really important that they're able to talk with me, feel connected with the school, and that I'm able to work with the therapists on that. So that's a very important part of a school counselor's role.
If I could just add, what we've also found is that, needing all of the different professions involved, but we often didn't have anywhere to send kids who really needed the clinical services. And because of this grant program, we found in the 5 years the program's been available that half of the children had never received treatment before, and half of them had a serious emotional disturbance. So clearly they weren't doing well in school. And we heard from counselors and social workers who were frustrated that they, couldn't get the children to get the treatment that they needed, or the family had too many barriers. And again, I think it's a great collaboration across, all the different professions that really makes the Minnesota model work.
I have one more question before we talk about the legislative issues, and that professionals, including school nurses, social workers, psychologists, chemical health specialists, as well as counselors, make up the student support services. Are there shortages in the other areas as well, or is this problem unique to the counselors in the school system?
Well, first of all, some of those areas do not keep track of the ratio between each one of all of them, but the school counselor ratio is the one that's recognized nationally as the one that has the largest difference between the largest deficit. So it's a matter of opinion whether there's a problem. I can speak to the nurses. In many of the schools that I've been in, there's been we've had clerks or administrative assistants, secretaries that have been distributing different meds for students, and that's not good. And so I do think there is a shortage of other ones, but I know that also within college and career readiness, which is one of the major issues in education today, and so that's why I think the school counselor issue is so vital today, because we are the ones who can help with this college and career readiness, because we have school counselors are trained in how to do career counseling. They're trained in finding the best post-secondary options, all those things that I've talked about. So that's why I think it's vital that we get more school counselors. But yes, I work with social workers, school psychologists, nurses, chemical health specialists. We need more of all of them. And so it's not like, so. But I do think that there's a big need for school counselors in Minnesota.
Thank you. Senator Johnson and Representative Newton, I understand that you've introduced legislation for this issue before. Could you talk a little bit about the legislation, what it has looked like in the past, what it's going to look like again if it's introduced again, and how would we pay for it?
And that's the issue. The legislation that I introduced last time provided for, I think it was 400 counselors 400 student per counselor ratio. And we were opposed by school superintendents and the fiscal officers of the schools, because they wanted to know how we were going to pay for it. How can we do this? And the bill that I had the last time and that Tom Tilbury had carried prior to that virtually went nowhere. It died in committee. And I know that Senator Johnson had done this years ago and carried the bill years ago. So this is not a new issue. It's not a surprise that we are number 48 out of the 50 states when it comes to school counselors. But especially in Anoka, Hennepin, where we've had this rash of suicides that we have read about in the paper, but what we don't read about is the number of attempted suicides that weren't reported. That it sort of highlighted Anoka, Hennepin, and the need for mental health professionals, for Dr. Kumar and for others, and we've done better, but we're still not close to meeting the minimum, and especially in our elementary schools. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe, Sue, that you had mentioned once before that some 20% of our children in any given school year have mental health issues. We're not getting those issues identified and getting the children to the professionals that can help them. So that's, we're going to try again. We're going to introduce the bill. Governor Dayton, in his last, I think, State of the State message or budget message, had indicated that this was a priority that he had, but we haven't seen the money.
And will the identification you're expecting to come from the school counselors primarily? Identification and referral?
Yes. Well, the identification will come across the board, and is everything from what Dr. Kumar said was our bus drivers, our secretaries, everyone who works in the school, if they see an issue bordering on mental health especially, they'll report this to get the children into counselors and into mental health professionals. So it's everyone working in the schools is responsible for that.
Senator Johnson, would you like to add?
I would, because as Representative Newton said, I have carried counselor bills in the past and have been very supportive, and particularly this year when the governor is talking about, and the legislature is talking about the value of early intervention with problems, early education that will help to build our economy and reduce our costs. I have an article here that was presented to me a few years ago. It says, who loses when students don't have access to school counseling services? And the answer is, in the end, we all do, because it costs a lot of money. What happens is they disrupt the classrooms, they're absent, they don't learn, they don't meet their potential. We are looking for a world-class workforce for the future, and we know that we need to use every student that's in our schools. We can't afford to take care of these problems that are facing our children. And I think counselors and the workers, workers like nurses and the other jobs that the school has that will help to keep those children in school and out of prison. Think of it. Think of the costs that it will bring to our society if we lose these children that have mental health issues and don't get proper counseling. I'm sorry, I moved away from that microphone. It means a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the panel for answering those questions, but we're going to take a short break now, and when we come back, we're going to have questions from the audience.
Teach us how to eat healthy and exercise.
According to the Center of Disease Control, 17% of children and adolescents are obese. Lead by example. Teach your children to eat healthy and exercise.
Get set, go!
Welcome back. This is a league meeting, so as you might expect, there's a lot of questions. First of all, Nita, could you clarify the continuum of support and services and who is qualified to provide the services?
Sure, I can explain about the continuum of services that we have at the Anoka Hennepin School District. So we have some prevention services in place, we have some early intervention, and then our school-based mental health program. So the prevention services that we have in place are really about identifying students who are experiencing some adverse situations and helping them cope with those. So we're going to be starting a program in resiliency in the 2015 school year, 2015-16 school year, where we can help children become better able to cope with adversity. There's a big study that was done with collaboration with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and Kaiser Permanente clinics, where they looked at adverse experiences that children went through in childhood and the long-term impact to health and quality of life and in adulthood. So if we can help students do better with managing kind of stress, coping, before any sort of real mental health symptoms come forward, I think we'll be in a good situation to be able to kind of halt some of the progression of some of the issues that students are going through. And I think the counselors, our social workers in our schools are really great staff to do that kind of prevention work. The early intervention piece that we have in place is a mental health screening that we're offering. With parent permission, students can get a mental health screening in our school district. It's a pretty balanced view of what's going on with the student because we're assessing for mental health, positive kind of mental health attributes, as well as some of the difficulties that they're going through. So completing that screening, the staff who are going to do that are the social workers, counselors, nurses, and psychologists. They complete the screening, share the results with the student and the parent, and then offer some strategies for moving forward. And then our school-based mental health treatment program is really clinical mental health services that includes an intake into the treatment services. So this requires parent consent. Parents are involved in it. They have to give permission for the minor to receive the services. Then they do a diagnostic exam. They collect a lot of information about the family's history, the history of the presenting concerns. There's a lot of detail that goes into that. And then they develop a treatment plan and then also then initiate the therapy services. And it's pretty comprehensive, and it's ongoing for several weeks and then they observe for goals that have been met and make decisions about terminating therapy. So it's time limited. It's not the ongoing relationship that our school staff have with the students. It's really specific, targeted to meeting some treatment goals. So that's the difference between the work that the school therapists do and what social workers, counselors, and psychologists do in the schools, because they don't diagnose and they don't do treatment.
Thank you. In relation to that, and in relation to data privacy, how much information is shared between the various professionals involved with treating, counseling the student and parent?
Information can be exchanged between the provider and the school staff if the family signs a release of information. And that's the only way that information is shared.
Thank you. Does the deficit ratio exist to the same degree throughout the state, including metro rural, or does it parallel the per pupil dollars that districts receive?
I'll try to answer that. One of the issues that we have are the smaller school districts. So you might only have 150 to 300 students in the district. And the person who serves as counselor is also the bus driver, the special ed advisor, and community ed. I mean, they've given all these jobs and thrown it into one bucket, and they're really not certified or qualified to act as a counselor. So that is an issue. We have to figure a way to deal with smaller districts. One of the ways that we can do that is to share counselors in the smaller school districts with other small school districts, because they tend to be fairly well located within small areas. But and in larger districts like Anoka, Hennepin, we were just talking during the break, we have something in the neighborhood of 30 counselors for the students. We've got 39,000 students. So the math would show that we've got one counselor for 1,300 students, which is huge. And yet we're ahead of the curve on so many of the things that we're doing in the district. So it's an issue that really has to be addressed, and has to be addressed now.
And then, how do you propose to pay for this? No unfunded mandates, please.
Okay, I'll take that one on. again, I think we have to look at what does it cost if we don't do it. And that is something that I think we need to address. And I would, as I was thinking about a comment that I'd like to put out in front of people is, especially for the League of Women Voters, we're looking for advocates who share our views here on the panel that this is important work for our state, and that it indeed is a worthwhile project and probably get a better return on investment than many other money that is being spent. So we have to start looking that way. I am almost, well, I'm a very strong advocate for looking at return on investment and how do we use the resources that we have as best we can in order to serve the people, the taxpayers. They are very concerned about wasting their taxpayer money, and I don't blame them. I'm one of those. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to convince people that this is really not a waste of money, but it's an investment, as our governor has called it, and I like that rather than spending.
Thank you.
And if I may add one part to that, is that not only is it an investment as far as keeping some of our young people out of prison, being able to make sure that, but the other part is have them be part of a trained workforce, is that before I was a counselor, I was a computer programmer, and I do software programming. I've been a consultant, and many times that I've worked for Wells Fargo and different banks and Target, and many times we do not have the computer programmers that they need, and we have to get people. For me, it was people from India who would be consultants like me, and I would be the only person from Minnesota who would work that. So we need to, school counselors can help with that issue. And just to talk about one of the things that we teach classroom lessons of, we have small groups, is about STEM careers, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. And for our girls in school, it's really important that they consider those careers, because there's a big deficit with that. And I think that when we have more school counselors, we can address that deficit.
Jim, this question is for you. What is the focus of a counselor at the elementary level? It wouldn't seem to fit with career or financial planning at this level of education.
Okay. That's a good question. Well, it is. With an elementary counselor, there is a lot about in the personal social domain is very important. It talks about, bully prevention is something that is very important, but it's how to build a sense of self, what are your interests, what are your skills, how can you build on those skills, helping to develop those habits of success, like starting in later elementary about taking notes, and how can you take notes, and there's been studies that have shown that the earlier we get students to do some of those habit successes is important. I can tell you when I was working with Ramp Up to Readiness, we had, with that college and career readiness program, we had one school, their average ACT score was 28, which is like in the 95th percentile. And we had another one at 27, another one at 26. And the biggest difference with that is that those students had learned how to do those habits of success early in elementary school, and they were able to deal with those types of things. That's important. But the last thing I'd like to talk about, elementary counseling. Career counseling does come into elementary counseling. It talks about, first in early elementary school, it's about career awareness. What are the types of careers in your community? What is, like one of the schools that I had that was in northern Minnesota, was welding was really big in their community. How can you do that? What do you need to be a welder? And those are something to talk about, bring those people in to talk with them. But in later elementary, 4th, 5th, if they have 6th grade, is to start talking about career surveys and to get them to learn about their certain interests and skills that align with different careers. And it's been shown it's beneficial. Actually, doing those career surveys and inventories have found to be most effective in middle school, and that's been shown in research multiple times.
Without counselors, is someone else fulfilling some of those roles?
Yes.
Is it just not happening?
Yes. I mean, are they? It's like, here's like my analogy is that I think I could, like, I was I have a degree in elementary education and math, and so I think that I could be a pretty good social studies teacher, but that doesn't mean I should teach social studies, because the biggest part is what you don't know. The big problem is you don't know what you don't know. And I think that is a big problem with the people who are not licensed school counselors who are doing these types of services. In the career and post-secondary domain, it's very important, but it's especially scary in the personal social domain. When we were talking about suicide prevention, and I can't tell you how many times when I've had students who've come in and that they're showing high in some of the suicide ideation, and it's just scary to think a bus driver might be somebody who they're talking to.
Thank you. Actually, increasing the number of counselors, social workers, etc., suggests those people are out there somewhere waiting for a job. Would there be people to hire if the funds were available?
Yes. Okay. First of all, there are other states, like in all of our neighboring states have much lower ratios than we do. It's, they're even below the national average. They're more in the 300, 400 range. So, and they all have bills that address the number of school counseling. North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska all have school counselor bills. And so we could get from that. Also, I teach at the University of Minnesota, and we have, every year, we have students who want to go, who want to be school counselors here, but there aren't enough openings and they go to other states. The last thing is that there are counselors where there are more counselors in other states, that their recent graduates are looking for places to work and we could recruit them in. But I will say the one area that sometimes is when we're in greater Minnesota, and sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to find counselors who would be willing to go to greater Minnesota. But I think if we had that, we could, if we knew there were going to be counselors out there, that there would be people from that area who would like to become school counselors.
If I could just add to that, is that what we know we don't have, and we've not been able to expand schooling to, mental health grants beyond what we have, are mental health professionals. So even in several counties in our state, we don't have even a clinical social worker. Many don't have a licensed, just regular psychologist. And of course, we have one of the worst ratios in the country for child psychiatrists. So it's great that we have them at this level, but we need the people that they refer people to as well.
Are you talking about those professionals within the school system or in general?
These would be mental health professionals. So people who can do the clinical work, we have very severe shortages.
Thank you. This is a little bit different focus. Some tech-type specialty schools in Minnesota are very expensive and don't have credits that transfer to a degree offering institution. Is it a good use of funds to support those schools?
I would say yes, and the reason is if we have a tech school that gets a student on a career path to a job, and it's a decent paying job, then we should be supporting those schools. Recently, I think it was St. Paul, the 2-year school in St. Paul, I can't think of the name of it, but there have been a couple places. Anoka Technical College also cut the programs for bakers and cooks, because what they found is even though they were training the people in a 2-year program, that when they got out, they would get an $8 an hour job. And so, even though they had a career, it wasn't a career that was leading them to success. So I think in cases where you have a job at the end and you're training people, that the state should be supporting it.
Thank you.
If I may add something,
sure.
Is that on the whole, technical colleges are less, their tuition is less than a four-year college. And so even though there are some technical colleges that are a little bit more, they're usually less. But I also think that, for example, I'll just say the welder one is, if somebody wants to become a welder and they get a degree in that, and then it ends up 2 years later that they want to do something else, then I think that's a chance you take in any profession. That's why it's so important, that academic planning piece is that. For right now, it's projected for students who graduate in 2015, they'll change careers 7 times. And so we need to have them have the academic background so that they can change those careers, so they're able to go to a from one high-skilled career to another high-skilled career.
Thank you. In an article by a Dr. Sasser, she predicts that the number of practicing school counselors will increase by 11%, and the number of school psychologists will increase by 14% by the year 2018. Will this predicted increase fill the needs in both service areas?
Can you tell me who this person is?
I don't know her background, but she wrote several articles on school counselors, but what she was talking about is the predicted increase if we continue at the level we're doing now. And she's saying there would be an 11% increase in school counselors and a 14% in school psychologists. However, would that percentage take care of the problem?
It would certainly be better than what we have now. There would be no doubt about that. So I guess I would hope that she's accurate, and of course it would be good if we could get to the ratio that is expected of 1 to 250 students. But anything I think that we can pull together right now would be very valuable. And I would say yes. And again, I think it is because we are starting to look at the way that we can build our economy is through our children, who are going to be the future workforce. And if we need to do this in order to get those children ready for the future workforce, it will be a benefit to all of us in the long run. And that's where I go back to the idea of the return on investment, not for the short term, not for 1 year. You can't look at it as 1 year's work, but the expenditure and the investment is a long-term thing.
If I can, just an 11% would be great, but would that take care of the deficit? That would take us to about one counselor every 700 students. So if that's, I think, I would hope our goal would be a little higher than that.
Thanks for the math lesson.
Sorry.
This is another college-related question. Many students who take college credit courses in high school reduce the time in college. Does this suggest that high school really isn't important anymore for higher achieving students?
I mean, I'll answer that unless somebody else.
I'll just say very quickly that I think there is something that we'll be looking at in the future. That there will be kind of a combination between high school and college, and that there will be a lot of college that will be taking place in high schools, and I think that's good. I really do, because I think we'll have the opportunity to have more children exposed to the fact that they can get college credits.
I think also for high achieving students, they tend to be ahead of their class and they take the college credits. One of the things that tends to hold students back is if, for example, they're in our area and they're going to Anoka Ramsey, they're no longer spending their day in their school. And so they're not, they're afraid they're going to miss out on the prom and playing football or all these other things that go along with the high school experience. And so we have to find a way to make sure that the students who are doing the PSEO, the post-secondary program, stay integrated with their base school.
I think there are other programs like the International Baccalaureate Program, which really absolutely challenges high-achieving students, and AP classes as well.
and I was going to say that you stole my thunder there.
Sorry, my kids
but
were-
it's there.
My,
there
my
are-
kids went through an
there-
IB program, so
I mean,
I know how
think-
hard it is.
I think that both having the off-campus experience when you're in high school is very valuable, as well as the AP and IB classes. I think the more that we can raise the rigor, the better it is. One of the biggest indicators of whether a student will have post-secondary success is if they take some sort of college credit course. So I think that one of the things as school counselors that we really try to get even our students who are, maybe don't, that have a 2.5, 2.8 GPA as opposed to 3.5 is say, well, maybe you're really good in social studies or English or some sort of technical type of technical type of course, and can you think about taking a college course for college credit in that? And that is shown to be very effective.
Speaking of technical schools, how can we better support our technical college system? They are stepchildren in many ways.
Well, school counselors definitely do not treat them like stepchildren. I can say that we are, as I said at the beginning in my opening comments, that 2-year degrees, certificate programs often lead to high-skilled careers, and it's projected more and more that those technical careers are going to become more and more prominent, and so the students need to know that, and school counselors teach lessons that show which professions are projected to get bigger and which ones are projected to decrease. And so, I don't see that as educators being condescending to technical programs.
And Anoka Hennepin has a unique program, the STEP program, with Secondary Technical Education Program, which is a program for high school students. They actually have a building co-located with the technical college, and it's like a PSEO program for students that are going into technical fields. So they get a chance to be with the college and yet be taking technical courses at the high school level. And it is a model for the state.
Thanks. Our last question is for Nita and Sue. In schools, people speak of testing psychologists. What do they do?
They're doing psychological testing and evaluation for academic purposes, for assessment for special education services.
Yes, that's correct. So they're not doing clinical work. It really is more related to, what's the discrepancy in that child from the normal academic, rigor that they should be able to do versus what they are able to do.
Thank you.
I could say that also, just as far as the psychologists go and the social workers in the schools that I've been in, a lot of them are paid through Title I funds, which is through special education. And so a lot of them, much of their day is worked with special education students, whereas a school counselor is somebody who works with all students. And there are some social workers and that do work with general education students, but I just haven't come across that yet. I don't think that's the norm. I know that there's one other part that I forgot to that I didn't address. Can I just take, and that is about the deans and also people who are not licensed school counselors, that there are many districts that have gone to the dean model, and such as Forest Lake, Mounds View, Spring Lake Park, and so there is no licensure for a dean, and so a dean, and we actually ran a report, and I'm not sure, but I think it's approximately around. We have 78 deans around the state that don't even have a teaching license, and we ran this through MDE, but there a lot of times deans are teachers who have no experience with what a school counselor does especially as I said, with the personal, social, mental health domain, but also there are deans that that do discipline, some suspend students. And so school counselors are asked to become deans. And so at one point there's somebody who's trying to help someone with a personal social issue, but then the next day they may be turning around and giving them some sort of a punishment, which they are not licensed to do. So that's another big problem that's becoming bigger and bigger. Spring Lake Park went to this dean model this year, and I think that it's something that we need to that needs to be addressed. Is that what we're just asking for is that people be licensed for the job that they're doing. It's just like we don't have math teachers hopefully we don't have math teachers teaching math who don't have a license in math.
And I have a bill that I'll be introducing that basically says if a school district has someone who's working in the capacity of a school counselor but isn't licensed, that they have to notify the parents that they're not a licensed counselor, just to make sure that the parents are aware that you've got someone guiding them who isn't really qualified to do so.
And so,
did you have something to add?
Well, one thing I just wanted to add, and I think we've kind of skirted around the issue in some ways, is that in order to really have, a successful, great workforce in the future, that we have students who are graduating, who are well-rounded, it isn't enough to just take tests. It isn't enough just to have really good teachers. That child has to be in a state of mind to be able to learn. And that's why we need school support personnel. That's why we need clinicians, mental health clinicians, to make sure that these kids are really ready to learn. They need guidance. I think it's great that kids can go to college to get classes while they're in high school, but we also need them to develop social skills, which you develop in high school as well, whether it's being part of the band or on a sports team or something like that. So I think we have to be careful about only looking at how kids do in tests and with grades, and understand what it takes to get there.
We don't have any more questions, but is there anything that you would like to add?
I would like to just reiterate what Senator Johnson says. We would like to have the League of Women Voters, not only the local chapter, but the state league, get behind this as an issue, because we're going to need outside help to try to get this through, and we're going to run into opposition. We always have. It's taken years, and we haven't moved the dial very much. And we're recognizing that we do need to change that ratio to get something at least closer to the national average.
Thank you.
I think that the lack of school counselors is primarily an ethical issue, that it is not ethical for a student to come in who has an eating disorder, who has suicidal ideation, who has, I could tell you, 20 different types of issues that a school counselor faces, but it is estimated that 20% of students by the time they graduate with high school have some sort of a mental health issue. And so to have nobody there who's in the front line who can recognize this, who can provide services to help with that, I think is unethical. But I also think that it's unethical in the college and career readiness domain too, that we have a lot of students here in Minnesota who do not know how to make informed decisions about possible career paths. What are the best post-secondary options? How to do academic planning? How to finance a post-secondary education? And how to develop those habits of success. And I think that all of that is an ethical issue, but also it can be a liability issue. I mean, if there's somebody who comes to a school counselor who isn't licensed and they talk about bully prevention or suicide or something, it could become a liability issue also. So I just think that in order for us to best serve our students and our family, in my opinion, there is no doubt that we need to significantly increase the number of school counselors in Minnesota.
Thank you very much. I think we've all learned a lot about the school's counseling system today. And thank you to QCTV for taping the program for us. If you want more information about the League of Women Voters ABC, you can find us on Facebook under League of Women Voters Minnesota ABC. You will also find a link to our information through the League of Women Voters Minnesota webpage. And again, thank you to the panel and thank you to the audience.